There have been many relatively obscure Five Nights at Freddy's characters over the years. Many of them are relegated to cameos or show up in spin-offs or are lost to time, but one particularly odd case, in my opinion, is Ella. A small doll who was initially featured as a throwaway toy was then elevated to plot device, popped up suddenly in the books later, and then circled around to a film cameo as a completely different creature entirely. It is an interesting case, especially when you look at where she originated from and how she ended up back to back. And especially considering what she is. Unlike the multitude of large, violent animatronics featured in Five Nights at Freddy's, Ella is merely a small doll. She stands about as tall as a toddler with curly brown hair, a pretty poofy blue and pink dress with a matching bonnet, and little Mary Jane shoes, sometimes with wheels on them. While some of her features change depending on appearance, her big round pink cheeks are a constant. She seems to be made out of porcelain, though in her Fazbear Frights appearance she is alluded to having soft skin. The Silver Eye trilogy books have a minor inconsistency in what she is holding. In the first book she is holding a teacup and plate, and in the second and third she is holding a tea tray. So a little oops. Not the first time we had an inconsistency between the Silver Eyes and its sequels, am I right? Now, this is normally where I'd go over the basics of what Ella is and a possible personality, and in this case, I can't on either. Ella has no personality. In pretty much all of her appearances, she is totally lifeless in one way or another. And she herself, what she's made for, what she is, might look similar but is drastically different in every appearance. So we'll have to take apart each Ella on their own. Let's get into the book trilogy appearance first. Introduced in the Silver Eyes, Ella is one of Charlie's, the main character's, old toys. She is a small doll on a track who comes out of a little closet with her varying tea supplies and wheels around the room, all controlled by a crank at the foot of Charlie's bed. She, along with Theodore the rabbit and Stanley the horse, were built by Henry, Charlie's father, and she played with them often as a child. Ella's mentioned briefly in the Silver Eyes and in the Twisted Ones without much importance. It isn't until the fourth closet when the truth about Ella is uncovered, though hints such as finding out that younger Charlie had a dress that looked exactly like Ella's, that Ella had an illusion disc in her, and when it's activated she looked exactly like the young child form of Charlie, led to the eventual reveal. The disturbing truth is that Ella, Charlie's toy, was actually her toddler body. See, Charlie died when she was young, and we follow the life of a duplicate robot Henry created out of grief. He cried into a rag doll and shoved it into Ella, who I'm assuming he built around the same time. This brought Ella to life, and he used illusion technology to make her look like the real toddler Charlie. Then once she got old enough, though it's never clarified how long later, he shut down toddler Charlie and activated child Charlie, moving the rag doll into her. Then he built a track and bolted down her old body onto it so it could serve as one of her toys, while she was serving as his. Now, Henry's quote-unquote madness is used as a band-aid to cover up many of the horrid implications of his behavior. But something I find peculiar here is how he is so willing to believe that dolls and robots are Charlie, but the second he's done using them as a vessel for her, he begins using them as tools. He believed this was her baby body, but the second he believed she moved on from it, he didn't, bury it or put it away in the closet. He started using it as her toy. He bolted it to the floor in her room and had her play with it. That's creepy. It's not the fact that it's a robot. Part of his mindscape was supposedly that the lines of reality were blurred, but that he could shut off attachment so easily that he would see that as a perfectly normal thing to do. And I think in a way you can say that it makes sense to how he really saw Charlie herself, or her robot form, as a toy that he would upgrade to keep the illusion up. And then when he was done playing with her, he didn't secure her future by finishing her final body, but left her by ending his life. Notably, not in a sudden act, but in one that he staged by building a robot for it. So he was willing to spend the last of his days building a robot to end his life, but was not willing to build a robot for Charlie to have a future. Once he was done with it, he was done with it. And there's something so unsettling about it. About how easily he could switch his love to another object. Makes you wonder what would have happened if he was still alive when it was time for teenage Charlie to switch to adult Charlie. But that's not the point of this video. The point is about Ella, and that is a rather intense use of Ella, I'll admit. Looks like a doll, was at one point a toddler. And yet by her next appearance, Ella has become something completely different. So in the Silver Eyes, Ella is sort of suggested to be a one-of-a-kind toy. Henry built her for Charlie and built her to be this body, as far as we're aware. By 1:35 a.m., the Fazbear Frights story, not the current time of recording. The Fazbear Frights story, not the current time of recording. Ella is, instead, a mass-produced Fazbear Entertainment product. These are sort of Swiss Army dolls with a ton of features built into them for timekeeping, planning, taking photos, playing music. It's basically a smartphone in doll form, which, yes, is very odd, but effective. But the story is about only one of these dolls, found by cripplingly depressed divorcee, Delilah, and is taken home with her. This one only works as a glorified alarm clock as it is old and partially broken. The clock itself, despite what the cover shows, is set in its belly. So Delilah has had a tough life and is surrounded by a bunch of cloud cuckoo landers. She's walking around in Wonderland 24/7. And she latches onto this doll because it reminds her of the child she imagined having but never did. But when the alarm clock doesn't work, Delilah throws out the doll she just bought and thinks that's the end of it. But it's not. 1:35 a.m. rolls around that night and she's awoken by something. She doesn't know what. Next night, same thing happens, and we jump through a few nights of this, all the while Delilah is fixated on throwing Ella out and keeps thinking about her, knowing that she is stalking her. She starts hearing noises at night, but she can't see her. But she knows it must be Ella. It affects her job, it affects her life. She can't sleep, she can't focus. Look, I'm gonna level with you. I reread this story before I made this video, and I had to skip through most of it because it is probably, quite possibly, the most boring thing I have read in years. It is just paragraphs upon paragraphs of nighttime routine, Ella's suspicion, depressed sad day, thinking about the past, constantly fixating about the past, constantly wondering if Ella's in the garbage. How many times is there line after line of her remarking about how Ella was supposed to be in the garbage? Over and over again. And when it finally kicks off, it doesn't get any better. It's a drag. It's boring. I've had episodes of sleep paralysis more entertaining than this story, and lasted almost as long. And before anyone uses the defense that this is supposed to invoke the feeling of depression, it does not. It doesn't feel at all like that's what they're going for. Because of the repetitive nature of it, it does feel very much like a story that maybe was about 4 pages long, was just stretched out really far, because there is... I can't express how the same points are just constantly meandered over, like I'm doing right now. But she crawls into a vent and dies. Literally. Seriously. There's very dull build-up through the entire story to nothing, and all the while you're reading about characters who, let's be frank, are all caricatures. And the thing is, I read this at some point, and I remember it, but I don't remember it being this boring. I must have just skipped a lot. Ella is later revealed to be in the possession of the Stitch Wraith, Jake and Andrew, as they're gathering up haunted objects. She is then assumedly crushed into a trash compactor. So yeah, Ella doesn't really do anything. And I mean that literally, because as revealed later in the epilogues, this isn't Ella tormenting Delilah. It's an agony demon in the form of a robotic mannequin that resembles a skinny circus baby, known as Eleanor, who is tormenting Delilah because it loves to feed off the suffering of others. So yes, that means this excruciating story is technically vital to the plot. But I digress. The point of all of this is a far cry from Ella's appearance in the Silver Eyes. By pretty much all accounts, everything about Ella in the Silver Eyes is different now. She was a unique sort of original, now she's mass-produced. She used to deliver tea on a tracks, now she's working as a smartphone. She wasn't haunted or aggressive back then, she was actually a vessel for Charlie. And now she, most of the time, might not even exist because a lot of her actions were actually Eleanor. It gets a little even weirder with the cameo and security breach on the arcade cabinets. So, I consider the arcade cabinets and security breach to be fourth wall breaks, not lore hints. Because there's references to things like the Joy of Creation and even Glitch Trap, who isn't supposed to be known by the company as per Help Wanted. He gets his own arcade cabinet. So I'd say Ella appearing with Theodore on an arcade cabinet called Theo's Brainbusters is just a cameo reference. The game looks to maybe be a zombie shooter, and there's even a sequel featuring Stanley instead of Ella called Theo's Back. But if it is canonically accurate, then the weird timeline of events this opens up is just so bizarre. Because these are Charlie's toys, so are the Silver Eyes trilogy books real books in universe like the games are? I don't know, and I'd rather not think about it too hard. I'd just say it's a wink and a nod. The most recent appearance of Ella was in an unexpected place, the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. I'm not going to include spoilers here. Well, I'm going to say some stuff, but not who it happens to or what actually happens. But Ella is a spring-lock suit. Not a tiny doll anymore, but an oversized suit. And not necessarily for wearing. Introduced in the movie are these animatronic torture suits made to kill those forced into them. I'm sure you've seen the killer Freddy head on the commercials, but there's also an Ella one, and a character almost gets shoved inside of it before XY's Chica and yada yada yada. But what I find more peculiar is, why is this Ella? Well, there's a few possibilities. It could very well be just a creepy design that was worth being reused. The eyeless porcelain doll. It is very effective. But something else is that apparently, and I learned this from the wiki, so take it with a grain of salt, but the film's novelization, which no, I did not read, says she is described as looking like Circus Baby, at least having pigtails. That must have been left over from the old novel draft. You know, the one where Doug was a pervert that accidentally made it into the final draft. Hey, come on, I get to be a little cheeky. I had to read 1:35 a.m. last night. But actually, my point is, the Fnaf movie went through a lot of drafts, and the novel came out pretty much at the same time as the movie. It makes me wonder if, in an early draft, this springlock suit was actually supposed to look like Circus Baby, and that was changed late in development. Likely so they could use her at a different time. And then Ella was the replacement. That's just a thought, really. It doesn't matter why Ella's here. It is a little odd, but it keeps the character alive. Or the non-character, the design. So, really, Ella is a very strange case. She is never a haunted animatronic. She was a toy first and foremost, and then in the later trilogy, a sort of plot tool that went along with Robo Charlie. Then she was seemingly a haunted doll, then actually not a haunted doll at all, but instead a prop by a clown demon, and in her most recent appearance, she has been upgraded to a springlock suit. She is a frequently used design, well, semi-frequently, but she is not a character. She has no story. Her story is as a piece of whatever story she's in. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I am saying that that's kind of strange, almost. It's hard to put it into words. I don't think there's been another character who's been used in this way. I think this really is just solely an Ella thing. And it makes you wonder, if Ella doesn't really have a straight-up personality, then why is she being reused as much as she is? At which this is only really 3 times, but why does she keep coming back? She's also plentiful in merch as well. And I suppose it must just be down to the design. A semi-creepy porcelain doll girl, but even then, I don't know. Maybe that's all it is. Because, at the end of the day, that's all there is when you're talking about Ella. Though hilariously, she is tangled up in some of the most bizarre Fnaf plots of all time, but that's neither here nor there. So, I hope you understand more about Ella, a character with a complex history even though she herself stands as only a small part of it. Thank you for watching. Also, rest in peace Stanley the Unicorn, largely unloved by all and so unimportant that this is my only chance to ever talk about him. We will remember you. Briefly.